Now we're going to see fetal orientation in uterus. So this series of videos is to prepare for the series of videos of normal labor, when we need to discuss the cervical changes and the cardinal movement of the fetus during the second stage of delivery. But first, we need to understand the position, the relation of the fetus to the mother. So we need to evaluate the orientation, the presentation, and the attitude. So I'm going to review all of these terms in the next videos. We start with the fetal orientation in uterus. So the fetal orientation in uterus is defined as what is the orientation of the longitudinal axis of the fetus relative to the longitudinal axis of the mother. And we can have three types. We can have longitudinal orientation. We can have a transverse orientation, or we can have an oblique orientation. So let's say if this is the mother, how to draw this? We are going to take a look, a lateral view of the mother, and we are going to do a sagittal section. So here is the mother, and let's say, so here is the abdomen. So this is the longitudinal axis of the mother. If the fetus is in this same direction, so this is the longitudinal axis of the fetus, this is the longitudinal axis of the mother. If it is in the same, if the longitudinal axis of both is in the same orientation, so here is the fetus, let's say fetal head, abdomen, extremities. So this is a longitudinal orientation. The longitudinal axis of the fetus goes with the longitudinal axis of the mother, or let's say is parallel. The longitudinal axis of fetus and mother are parallel. In the transverse orientation, we have the, let's say this is the abdomen. The longitudinal axis of the fetus is transverse to the mother. So this is the longitudinal axis of the mother, this is the longitudinal axis of the mother, and the longitudinal axis of the fetus is transverse relative to the longitudinal axis of the mother. So in other way, the transverse orientation of the fetus is when the longitudinal axis of the fetus and the mother make 90 degrees, or let's say they are perpendicular to each other, And the oblique orientation is an intermediate between these. So here is the abdomen, this is the longitudinal axis of the mother, and we will have like so let's say this is the longitudinal axis of the mother, and the longitudinal axis of the fetus is this. So if we extend this vector and this vector, roughly this is a 45-degree angle. So the oblique orientation is, here we have the longitudinal axis of the mother, and the longitudinal axis of the fetus is like 45 degrees relative to the longitudinal axis of the mother. So it's exactly an oblique orientation. So here, this is the angle between the longitudinal axis of the fetus and the mother is 45 degrees. This is a transitory orientation because either way, at the moment of the delivery, the fetus is going to be or in a longitudinal orientation or a transverse orientation. So no matter what, the oblique orientation is always a transient orientation. So fetal orientation in uterus is the orientation of the longitudinal axis of the fetus relative to the longitudinal axis of the mother. We can have longitudinal orientation, which is when the longitudinal axis of the mother is parallel to the longitudinal axis of the fetus. The transverse orientation, where the longitudinal axis of the fetus is transverse or perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of the mother, and the oblique orientation, which is a transitory orientation, where the angle between the longitudinal axis of the fetus and the longitudinal axis of the mother is 45 degrees.